next question I have involves a controversy about Ilhan Omar video that was tweeted. The video from her speech at CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations, on March 23rd. To read her quote directly, she said, "Far too long we have lived with the discomfort of being a second-class citizen, and frankly, I'm tired of it. And every single Muslim in this country should be tired of it. CARE was founded after 9/11 because they recognized that some people did something and that all of us were starting to lose access to our civil liberties." End of quote. So on Friday, President Trump attacked the freshman congresswoman by tweeting, "We will never forget," with that 43-second edited video from an unknown source of Omar's speech at CARE. And the video included her saying the sentence, "CARE was founded after 9/11 because they recognized that some people did something." The video goes back and forth between footage of terror attacks of the September 11th at Ground Zero with emotional music, and Omar saying, "Some people did something." The video ends with the text, "Some people did something, September 11th, 2001, we remember." So this tweet from President Trump as of today has 10.2 million views, over 23,000 retweets, and over 250,000 likes. This video has been all over the news for the last several days. Can you elaborate on this controversy?
Well, I mean, I think that is why we're doing what we're doing, because we have expanded the space of counter-radicalization and counter-extremism into one which highlights and includes explicitly this idea that we are living in an increasingly hyper-polarized situation. And one of the quotes that we oftentimes reference with regard to the way that we intend going about trying to deal with this very precarious situation that a lot of people don't realize the potential significance of these developments is we quote Albert Einstein, who said that you cannot solve a problem with the same level of consciousness that created it. And of course, he was talking about natural sciences, but the same applies in a situation where you have polarization in society. And while it's very easy to sort of highlight the conservative party and the rhetoric associated with the Trump administration, I think what we really need to look at in this case, we do need to take a step back and look at the part that the other side is playing, particularly from amongst the far leftist component of the Democratic Party, as we have sort of this splitting up into four parties right now in our country. We have the far left, we have the right, and we have the far right. And it seems in an age of populism, the far left and the far right to make the most ground, and there's not much room in the middle. And so we have I would identify it as a liberal fallacy on the left, that they are the educated class, that they are the ones with the facts, that they are the ones that are rational, whereas the other party is watching Fox News and is only induced by emotion. This quote from Ilhan Omar, no matter the disgusting nature of the response, is horrible, but she essentially handed the gift on the platter. Two fundamental things, and we could go on for a long time about the quote. CARE was not funded or founded after 9/11. CARE has been around for quite some time, and in the context of the early part of March, when she was giving this speech, the situation was one where she was already in the news and already feeding into the vitriolic rhetoric of the far right for her statement about AIPAC and basically politicians being in the pockets of the Israeli Political Action Committee, AIPAC. The problem is that the origin of CARE itself, CARE is an effort by Islamists to essentially imitate and replicate AIPAC's operations in the United States to steer them more towards an orientation toward Islam is much longer and older than September the 11th. CARE was founded in the 1990s, and it is very much funded by, at that time particularly, Muslim Brotherhood-backed interests and those that were seeking to sort of soften the reputation of Islamists who were trying to participate in the democratic policies of the Middle East, whereas they're trying to change the United States' position that the authoritarians in the Middle East were a better alternative to sort of one vote, one time Islamism. And that's a long story. So by suggesting that's the case and by being infactual and pretending that CARE is in some way, shape, or form a reaction to 9/11 is problematic enough. Because CARE was traditionally allied with the Republican Party. up until 9/11. And then after 9/11, what happened was you had a split Bush administration. And Bush administration started to sort of adopt this, the ideal was that they were accusing all Muslims, they were brandishing all Muslims as potential terrorists. And that's when organizations like CARE started to go more to the liberal Democratic Party. The problem with that is that there's this big sentiment that is represented by Ilhan Omar's second statement of fallacy, that some people did some things. And this is really the conspiratorial and victimization discourse that is promoted by a mainstream American Muslim community. Not the mainstream American Muslim community, but the mosque mainstream American Muslim community is run by imams that have a particular political persuasion that has pushed in the post-9/11 era for an opportunism, where they are victimized as people who are losing civil rights, losing civil liberties, and they're under persecution, and they are supposed to do what they portray the Prophet Muhammad as a social justice warrior. So there's been a merger between the American Muslim mosque community and the far left that's going back now, really running all the way through the Obama era as well, although in the immediate aftermath they tried to sort of partner with Obama. And so this is really a bad problem. So when you come and you say, some people did some things, the other problem that you're making is you're insinuating. You're like a 9/11 truther. You're not saying who those people are. You're not acknowledging that it was actually done by Al-Qaeda. And then there's no ability to conversate about the fact that there is a segment of the Islamist and Islamic religion that does believe and promote terrorism. So the idea that these people are not Muslim at all, that ideology has nothing to do with it, is something that has become prevalent, and it's very problematic. So again, this is all emotion for emotion's sake. It has no rationality. You can see in the misquotes, you can see in the misinformation. And what it does is it feeds and it gives the other party a possibility to point this out. And the people that are in the middle, the people that can otherwise be lured through rational discourse, that you can talk emotionally about a shift in consciousness, that you're playing off of the same level. You're responding in a way that is stimulus response, stimulus response, stimulus response, and the people are left in the middle with a fight or a flight situation where they have to either join one or the other side of the argument. And it's that type of hyperpolarization that sets democracies up for serious problems. I will say one more thing in closing. We ran an organization called Revolution Muslim, and it had a predecessor that operated from the point that 9/11 occurred until 2011 when I was arrested in Morocco. And it was a deliberate part of our projecting and propaganda to highlight the fact that the U.S. was at war against Islam and Muslims. And one of the ways that we did that was we would antagonize anti-Muslim bloggers. And we would give them the fodder that they needed for the idea that we wanted to implement Sharia law in America. And we would inform and instruct the far leftist critique of the United States as a imperialist power that was meddling in the affairs of others. And it was a very convenient way for us to promote jihadism while at the same time tearing polarization further apart in the society and helping to facilitate that growth of anti-Islamic sentiment. It's one of the biggest regrets that I have, particularly when you see something like Christchurch happen. When Christchurch happens, you see this symbiotic relationship between jihadism and far-right extremism, where you have this anti-Muslim sentiment that is growing to the degree where you have people walking into mosques and blowing away children because the idea is that they are invading forces. And then the next day you have an attack on a train on the Dutch subway system that kills 3 people, which is the retaliation. You have Abu Hassan al-Muhajir, the spokesman for ICC, releases a video within an audio statement within 48 hours of the Christchurch massacre, who says that people in the West are shedding crocodile tears for Muslims, and that Muslims that really believe in true Islam need to pick up arms, and then the attack on the Dutch subway system happened. So you have this very serious, what they're calling reciprocal radicalization occurring between Islamism and between the far right. But the mainstream community wants to suggest that they have absolutely nothing to do with the interpretation of Islam that promotes terrorism, and in fact they don't. But when you pretend that you're the victim, they're not the victim. The American Muslim community is not a victim. They are actually a recipient of an incredible benefit because they outperform their American cohorts at educational levels, at levels of income. They're much more highly assimilated in the United States system than Muslim immigrants in Europe are. And they're afforded opportunities to speak that they would never have in the countries of origin that their ancestors come from. It doesn't mean that they're supposed to express gratitude. But it does mean that when you suggest that you're a persecuted class and when you really look at the data, you're actually outperforming general American citizenry. It means that you've done what Hillary Clinton did to get Donald Trump elected. You're calling people your enemies that are not necessarily your enemies that need to be informed, but they cannot be informed with emotion, they need to be informed with factual statements. You're calling them deplorables. And you're giving a person who ran on a campaign that was supposed to just be a PR stunt, announced his running for president on the anti-immigrant policy, and it was so successful in tapping into the emotions of populism that he was able to merge that anti-immigrant sentiment with an anti-Islamic sentiment. So to the degree that within a week of coming to office, he had to declare a Muslim ban on Muslim immigrants coming from a particular set of countries. We really have to understand that addressing ignorance with ignorance is a big problem. It does not exonerate the response from Trump, but it does suggest that the far leftist reactions to the policies of Trump are only going to make things worse, and it's something that needs addressed. Doesn't mean we have to come somewhere in between on the middle. What we have to do is we have to do what Albert Einstein suggested, and that is attack these problems at a higher level of consciousness than that which is created.
This does need to be addressed, and this is very problematic, and it's increasing. Back to the video specifically, though, I'm thinking about other implications as well. We have the issue about Representative Omar reporting that there's been an increase of direct threats against her life. And amidst all of this, Nancy Pelosi urged President Trump's tweet to be taken off of Twitter, and his response was to unpin it from the top of his feed. It's still live in his feed right now. So what are the implications of this?
Ilhan Omar had no responsibility for the reaction. She should have thought ahead and made sure that when she was speaking, especially in CARE, you have to understand that everyone is listening. And when you speak in front of an organization, CARE is an unindicted co-conspirator in the 1996 attacks on the World Trade Center. To be a wire and to be wise about where you speak, to know what to say when you're there. This should be expected. Again, what I ended commenting on the last question, it was that there was, in the beginning of the Trump campaign, way back in 2015, remember there was this, he started by making momentum and getting himself in the mainstream media every day like he's doing with this tweet. This is free campaign. This is why he didn't have to rely on donors, because we can constantly get him on CNN 24/7 when he does laudatory stuff on Twitter. He is a mastermind of propaganda. I hate to say that. So I remember when he came into power and he started to say something like Mexicans were bringing crime, they're bringing drugs, they're all prostitutes, they're rapists, but some of them are good people, right? And that was the insinuation. So he's going to do the same thing with regard to this when he backs it off, right? Like, I didn't say all Muslims are terrorists, but Ilhan Omar is a communist. She's a sympathizer with the attackers of 9/11. And so some of these people, in fact, the majority of them are crypto-Muslims seeking to implement Sharia law. And it doesn't matter, because he understands that violence in an age of emotion can evoke the greatest reaction. So even if we look at it from a scientific perspective, and we just remove all of the political conversation, just the way the human brain works, we're predisposed to tribalism and to live in an us versus them world. We also have chemical releases in our brains when we see violence that are very different than when we see rational conversation, or even emotive, radical conversation that's nonviolent, right? So we have oxytocin levels in our brain that when we see violence, we get riled up. So there's nothing greater that can rile up the base. The only way that Donald Trump could be reelected is if he can rile up his base. And the claims are going to be a return back to, I fulfilled my promises on immigration. There's still these evil Muslims that want to destroy your democracy, right? And so, remember, he's telling people to, beat up leftists that are in his rally. Violence is part and parcel. Insinuated violence is part and parcel of the campaign that is attempting to take a democracy. And all over the world, it's not just the United States. We have an increasing, what they're calling in the political science literature, recent paper that was highlighted in the Council of Foreign Relations article that you sent me, is calling this wave of rolling back democracy and the rule of law a third wave of autocratization. And what we have is we have a recreeping of authoritarianism, where we have, it's not that democracy is being abolished, it's that democracy is being eroded step by step. We used to have a problem with cosmetic democratic reform when we would, at the end of the Cold War, we would pressure governments to at least appear more democratic so that we could continue to aid them. And they would. They'd give the veneer of cosmetic democratic reform, but there wasn't. Now we're rolling that back, we're even doing it domestically, and it's largely as a result of being able to merge a narrative of anti-immigrant to a narrative of Islamic people that are taking over, particularly in Western Europe, where instead of representing 1% of the population in countries like Britain, they represent 4, and some as high as 5 in France, etc. So they have a much more easier way to make that narrative. And so, I mean, really what we're seeing is if we continue to play into the game, we'll continue to see a general creeping role for a participation in democracy only so that you can further autocratize the system itself. And we might be so far-fetched, and it's not that far-fetched, to quote Hermann Göring of the Nazi regime, who essentially said that voice or no voice, the populace can always be brought to the bidding of the strong leader. And it's easy, that all you have to do is you have to tell them they're being attacked from outside, and then you denounce the pacifists for a lack of patriotism, right? The mainstream conservative party is passive, and they're appeasing, right? And then you can just basically get the people to do what you want, and then you can turn towards civil war. And all you have to do is look at the map of the electoral college results from last election. You have blue on the left coast and blue on the east coast, and then you have red all the way in between. And so we are a divided country, ripe and set for civil war. And we really have to start to recognize that there's only one way around that, and that is to address the problem and to try to induce a broader awareness in the population that doesn't participate in this bipolar, hyperpolarizing phenomenon that's increasingly leading to radicalization on both parties, increasingly delegitimizing all of those more centrist voices, and thereby going to increasingly result in more extremism. So if you increase the pool of radicals, by its very nature, you're going to increase the percentage of those radicals that grow frustrated and go on to engage in extremist belief and behavior. We have to put an end to it, and I don't think that we are addressing the situation in the way that it could best be addressed.
How do we stay out of the game? I mean, polarization being the key issue here. Could you talk more about Light Upon Light and other organizations that combat hate and extremism? Because we need to be really thinking about how we can combat the threat in a manner that we don't do more harm to others than good, which is, of course, the primary principle of any human service intervention or program.
That is the principle that should be always considered when even in determining how to combat the rhetoric or the propaganda of a political party that you're not necessarily affiliated with and stand on the opposite end of, is that you should do no harm. And that was what was lacking here. And you cannot give a person a gold plate, so to say, to eat their dinner on. And that's what we have to stop doing. The typical response would be, well, we need to have rational discussions with those that we disagree with. And that's true. We also have to recognize that people are not rational. So we're not dealing with a whole set of rational actors. And when you have crowd-like behavior, it's very easy to get caught up in things like the Mueller scandal. Paying attention every day to Mueller, we're going to impeach that mother papa. We're going to do this. He was getting urinated on by prostitutes. And we got caught up in that, and we missed any discussion about the policies that were actually happening on the ground. And whether we think that there's still room to suggest collusion or not, it doesn't matter. The majority of the accusations thrown were like tabloid scandals. And that's from amongst the people that consider themselves the most educated and affluent, that were wasting hours each day on Twitter commenting about something that ended up being essentially a conspiracy theory. So what we're dealing with is a global case of PTSD if we really look at all variables involved. And you could go off on conversations about what's happening in Iran, the removal of sanctions, the labeling of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard as a terrorist organization, statements that were made by Michael Pompeo in response to Senator Rand Paul about using the War Authorization Act that was used after 9/11 to go to tackle with Iran because Iran is allegedly in bed with Al-Qaeda, suggesting that we won't need congressional support to go to war with Iran, which would spark potentially thermonuclear war. This is the stage that we're at. The only way that can be ended, and then you talk about the flimsy economic variables, you talk about an administration that would do almost anything in order to get reelected, and nobody ever changes president midstream, so to say. It'd be a very serious interest in the event that polling starts to tank, to perhaps consider, war as a means of re-election. And that's horrible to say, but it's certainly feasible here. We can't play into that. That's that serious. It's not collusion with Russia. The Trump administration has been, if we look at the policy and not the national lampooning or National Enquirer-oriented discussion, discussion, the Trump administration is pretty hostile towards Russia and is increasingly worried about big state competition. So you have the potential for Russia, China, Iran, and others, Venezuela and others, periphery countries to ally. We have the conditions set for World War III with thermonuclear power. Like World War II, the last World War, ended with a Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Really time to consider things in a very different way. And that's what light upon light is essentially saying. Light upon light you could think of as an exponential. There's some metaphor in the Quran that says that Allah's light, God's light, is in different layers and manifestations. And at the end, after going through 7 different layers, it says it's like, consider it nur ala nur, light upon light, which means that it is a shift in consciousness. It's a complete shift in consciousness. And one of the characteristics of that shift is that it's neither of the East nor the West. And so we have a clash of civilizations paradigm that needs refuted. How do you refute that? Not by allying yourself with one or the other, but let's take a look, just simply, and then we'll end. Think of Islamism. Think of Islam as a religion. The Prophet Muhammad comes to a tribe, to a tribal society. Comes to a tribal society that is so sort of, let's say, backward or undeveloped that when Alexander the Great conquers most of the known world, and he's asked if he wants to go get Arabia, he says it doesn't really matter. It's not important. But Arabia is known for one thing, it's known for poetry. And so the Prophet Muhammad comes to an illiterate people. He himself is illiterate. And the very first thing he receives from Revelation, according to the tradition, is Angel Gabriel pressing him on his chest and saying, Iqra, recite, read. He says, I don't know how, I'm illiterate. He says, Iqra, recite the Quran. For 23 years, the Prophet Muhammad apparently receives these revelations that are of the highest eloquence, the highest poetic form. It induces a literacy movement that within 100 years of his death expands from China all the way into Spain. Sets the course of a trajectory of a civilization that lasts very strong for 800 years at least. That gives us preservation of the Greek works. That gives us scientific discoveries that are part and parcel of birthing what they call Western civilization, which is really a complete fraud, because there is no civilization in the plural. We as humanity are the derivative consequence of human beings spread from out of Africa 130,000 years ago. We're all united. And so when we talk about a global case of PTSD, we treat it the same way. Now we have, on the far left, we also have this problem where even if you are a radical, quote-unquote, radical leftist Muslim who wants to be perceived as a social justice warrior, the very conservative values that underpin the religion have been thrown out of the window, and there's an idea that you're living in a country that's founded by white, patriarchal bigots, right? And I think that we also have to consider the value of the American system. I think we have to look at the Declaration of Independence from 1776 and the role that God played, so that we are all established by a creator. But we're given certain rights. The post-enlightenment God of the creator is not incompatible with the God of the Muslim. Very incompatible with certain respects to the interpretation of the Constitution as an evangelical Christian doctrine. But somewhere in between, the founding fathers were deists who were completely aware that what they were inducing with the Constitution of the United States that birthed the wave of democratization throughout the world to the point where we are now covered in nation states across the globe that actually more than 50% of which practice the system that the American founding fathers developed. We have to understand the value and the utility of the role that consciousness played in their definition of God. And so that evangelical Christianity can be swept aside with a heightened consciousness, and that refutation, that rejection, that's because people 250, 300 years ago did not practice the values and the ethics that we hold dear today because we've engaged in some sort of progressivism, that they in turn were inherently evil. And so that's what we have. We have to have a paradigm shift that can build bridges based upon consciousness. The American Revolution was a consciousness shifting engagement and endeavor. And it is responsible for the fact that immigrants come from all over the world to our country and attain higher levels of education, that even the Chinese who are rising in scientific prowess train their most educated individuals at our universities, is something to be said for the people that created free thought, free speech, free expression, and the system that we live in. It's going missing and it's going lost, and we need to look at the principles upon which it was founded. You're not allowed to say that, but that's what we need. We need that sort of tapping into that consciousness. The founding fathers thought that they were engaging in a process that was of divine power. They recognized the limitations of the role that slavery was playing. Yes, Thomas Jefferson owned slaves. Did he want to end slavery? Yes. Did Alexander Hamilton own slaves? No. Did Thomas Paine? No. Right? And so there's a lot of rhetoric and hatred, self-hatred, with this idea that we need to birth in, and it's always been the case with communists and socialists, that we are a imperialist power, that capitalism is inherently evil. But we'd be really hard-pressed where we can end up allying with what would be perceived to be communist and socialist powers in Iran, in Venezuela, and in Russia. Socialism doesn't really work. And so I think that what we have to do is we have to attack this thing at a level where we're inducing the sort of literacy movement that both the Prophet Muhammad, the founding fathers, and people that truly understand, shifts in thinking, shifts in soul can do. And that's how you treat trauma at an individual and a collective level. You take the emotions that are prevalent and predominant in the behavior and driving the behavior, and you have to push them from the right side of the brain, which is creative, to the left side of the brain, which is rational. So you take the emotion, you attract attention, and then you make it factual, and then you make it rational. And we need to be a society that is geared towards doing that at a collective level. And if we do that, we can get the kind of consciousness-raising paradigm that Light Upon Light is promoting. And that makes organizations that combat hyperpolarization, radicalization, and extremism imperative.